Welcome to the Keen on Yoga podcast, bringing you the stories of many people who in various ways are attempting to walk the path of yoga. Our intention is to inspire your own practice and commitment to yoga beyond the mat and in all areas of life. We consider this an offering, a service to the community and labour of love. If you feel inclined, any donations are appreciated. Just visit our page and click the donate button at www.keenonyoga.co.uk/podcast. I hope you enjoy the show. Today's guest on the Keen on Yoga podcast is Celeste Pereira. Celeste is a trained dancer and trained physiotherapist. She did a teacher training in India in 2009. As life progressed, however, she found herself in a lot of pain, discovered the cause was her hypermobility. Just as hypermobility is glorified in dance, she found it was also glorified in yoga. Eager to see changes in the yoga world, she now uses biomechanics and strength training as the backbone of how she teaches to correct this tendency for hypermobility. Her yoga classes will definitely challenge you, and her workshops are informative, funny, and frankly, honest in her content. She has an amazing online presence, and I'm deeply honoured to introduce Celeste today to the Keen on Yoga podcast.
Thanks, Adam.
Great to have you. Can you just tell us a little overview of your background, how you got into yoga?
Okay, so I've got like two starts, and I always think of one when actually there's another one. But actually, the very first one was I was in a dance college when I first moved to England. And one day a week, this guy would show up, this random man, and he would do yoga with us. And, you know, being someone who always danced my whole life, I was like, I'm going to be so good at this. And man, I struggled. I mean, simple things like pyramid pose. I was like, just in this world. And I was like, this is incredible. Anyway, didn't think anything more of yoga, and life took a different path. I went traveling, came back desperate for money, decided, I'll just take an easy job in a gym. And it was there that I truly found yoga. This is where I normally tell people when they say, what introduced you to yoga? It was in London, and I was walking past the studio and they were doing Ashtanga yoga. And I was like, wow, that looks unbelievable. And I honestly didn't even put two and two together, but I thought, you know what? I really want to do that. So I ended up talking to the gym manager and I said, please, can I work my shift so that I could make that class? Fell in love with a teacher. What a babe. And I just dedicated myself to it. I absolutely loved it. And I found it so hard. She was a little Finnish woman, gorgeous woman. She was Heli. I just remember her first name, Heli, and she actually moved back to Finland, and I was gutted when she left. She fell pregnant and moved, and I was like, no, don't leave. And I just honestly got so much from yoga at that time, and that was my introduction to it. And then I ended up not ever thinking I'd ever teach it. It wasn't ever on the cards for me. I ended up going through physiotherapy at university, and then I thought, you know what? I'm going to take my student loan, which I saved it. You know, I was really good. I saved all my student loan. I thought I'm going to go traveling. And one of the things I'd love to do just for fun is I'd love to do a teacher training. And then I ended up in India and I did a teacher training. And then I came back again, desperate for money. I thought, do you know what? I don't want to teach yoga, but I'll just do it for a bit of side cash because I'm really, really low on cash. So when they say don't get into yoga for the money, well, whoopsie daisy. I ended up getting into yoga for the handsome £25 an hour they were paying me in the gym.
Well, at least you saved your student loan and did something sense with it. I just took my student loan to the bar.
I think that's an unsensible way of spending your time at uni.
I had fun, yes, but it wasn't. Yeah, it could be more constructive. Right. So you started teaching in a gym, yoga. Yeah.
Yeah. And I never thought that I'd stick with it, but you know, I just absolutely loved it. And I got so much from the people that came to my classes, and it just took off. It was weird. It just took off. And I was like, okay, I think I have to surrender. I still carried on looking for physio work, but I was like, look, something is happening here and I don't want to ignore it. And yeah, here I am talking to you.
Yeah, you are natural. You really are. I mean, found Celeste through just watching her Instagram, and her videos and her content is incredible. If you get a chance to do that, you really should. So you went to do the teacher training, and you're not, I mean, from a lot of our listeners are Ashtanga based listeners, but you're not Ashtanga based. But so you did a Vinyasa teacher training, I think. I mean, if you just wanted to introduce your style of yoga,
no, I did not do a Vinyasa teacher training. So this is what's funny. So I had a passion for Ashtanga when I first started. I was like, oh, Ashtanga is the best thing ever. I had no money. You have to understand how incredibly broke I was. So I had this little pot of savings from my student loan, but I was like, I want to go traveling for a significant amount of time. I've really got to try and maximize what I've got. So I'm going to go and look for the cheapest teacher training I can find that's Ashtanga based in India. So now I'm on Google and I'm looking up Ashtanga teacher training. What a mistake. So I end up in this little 500 pounds all in teacher training. And they're like, okay, get up at 5. So we're there, we do the chanting, we're starting to do the yoga. I'm like, this is not Ashtanga. This is not Ashtanga. And I realized they use Ashtanga as the key word for Patanjali.
Oh, right. Okay.
8 limbs of yoga.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
So listen, I had the best experience of my life. I am not sorry. But while I was there, I was like, bloody hell, I've got to do hatha yoga for a whole month. So it was funny because I had all this Ashtanga experience. Then I got all this hatha experience, which was good for me because I'm a really type A. And as a lot of the listeners probably know, a lot of type A people are drawn to Ashtanga, but it's not always good for us. And so
go back in your bedroom and do an Ashtanga practice after the morning,
I did it. In the beginning, I was kind of like, really hardcore Ujjayi breathing. And I was like, oh, this is so boring. But I had a terrible attitude, by the way. But then I started being like, do you know what? I need to slow down. And that hatha teacher training did so much for me on such a deep level. And still now when people ask me, where would you go for your teacher training? I'm like, go to the place in India. It was awesome. And then when I came back, I just realized, me as my personality, I'm a bit of a rule breaker. I was like, I don't want to teach what everyone else is teaching. And this was a really, really good thing I did. If anyone's a yoga teacher and they're hearing this and you're not, dedicated to a specific path, I feel like this is maybe where a lot of teachers go wrong, is they teach what everyone else is teaching. And to forge your own path in a crowded market, it's very difficult. I didn't do that. I was like, I'm going to dance to my own drum beat. I thought I'm going to sit down and think of all the classes I've ever been to and the best things about every class. And I made a list and I was like, I'm going to just create my own thing. And I labeled it Vinyasa because I didn't want to call it my name. I didn't want to call it anything else. I thought I'm just going to call it Vinyasa because whatever, it's, it's a label that people understand.
But did you use your physiotherapy background in doing that? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't know where to start with picking out the best elements. Like, how did you analyze what you liked about it? Because we obviously want to touch on your penchant or your great knowledge on hypermobility here, in a minute. Were you using anatomical principles at that time, or were you just using what you kind of liked?
I don't know. When you leave university, you know so little. So you've got this, you must remember, we don't just do musculoskeletal, we do musculoskeletal a bit. So I knew like all the names of the bones and all the muscles, but we also did respiratory and neurology. Plus we have to go out into the community and we have to work with real life people. So to cram all of that into, how many years was my degree? 3 years? I can't remember now. 2 or 3 years. To cram all of that in that space of time, it was 3 years, is 2 years? Gosh, I can't remember now. It's 3 years. I was like, I can't remember how long I went to uni.
You came out feeling that you didn't know the subject.
Well, yes, but then, obviously, you've got a bigger head on your shoulders at that age and you're like, oh, I know so many things. Yeah. I'm so clever. But to be honest, looking back, I really didn't know what I was doing. So I tapped mostly into what I liked. I tapped into what I enjoyed. And that worked. That worked for my career. But I didn't even click that I was hypermobile until way later. I was just injured all the time. I was going to Dharma classes And I was just leaving in so much pain. And I kept going to the physio. I was like, what am I doing wrong? And she was like, you're doing yoga. That is what you are doing wrong. I was like, no, mate, yoga's the best thing since sliced bread. She's like, no, you're putting your body into things you're just not supposed to. And then I put 2 and 2 together after a lot of injuries, and I was like, things have to change. I need to really readdress what I'm doing, because if I'm in pain with all the knowledge I have, what about other people? And that's when I started Hypermobile Yogis.
Doesn't seem very honest, does it? If you're in pain, I mean, well, it's an endemic experience, right? The yoga, especially in the Ashtanga world, yoga teachers in pain. Doesn't set a good precedent, does it?
No, it's not a good thing.
What would the basic things, if you could just be kind of very basic and simplistic in presentation, that you felt that you were doing the wrong, that you were able to correct, that got you from a place of loving yoga but being in pain to where you are now? Yeah.
So a few things. One, to only do yoga, I believe, is unhealthy. I believe, although it's one of the most well-rounded practices out there, it doesn't tick all the boxes. You need, as a human body that has evolved through nature, that is designed to lift, we should be lifting. We should be putting resistance into our training. Passive end range stretches to go deeper into your joints is not healthy. Your ligaments are not designed to overstretch. They have a very, very low capacity for stretch. And once they go too far, that's it. And actually having a huge amount of joint range that you can't control neurologically through your active range is pointless. It's pointless for the body. Those were 2 huge changes that I brought into my life.
And what's active range for people not so?
Yeah. So if let's take, for example, you're standing on one leg and you lift your knee to your chest. If I held my knee and pulled my knee in, that's my passive range, because my muscles don't really have to do anything. If I let go of my leg and I pull my knee into my chest, that is my active range. And you can do that in any joint angle with any pose. I removed passive end range out of my life completely. And it was very quick that my body responded. And I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing. I mean, ego-wise, it was a huge knock because I've got all this range in my body and I could go so deep. But I mean, I was just in pain for my big fat ego. I mean, what a stupid price to pay. Just no point.
I think you have to get to that place, don't you? It's not unusual that people do that for the sake of their ego, which is so essentially what you'd be saying is that it's an active or engaged stretch. Yeah.
What I'm saying is it can be an active or engaged stretch. Yeah. Or just remove the thing that you're using to keep your body in place. So if you're using the floor to do pigeon, try to do a plank and keep your leg in the same shape as pigeon. And can you go as deep? Or can you stand on one leg and lift your leg into the shape of a pigeon? You probably can't. And if there's a huge difference between what a passive pigeon looks like on the floor and a standing one-legged pigeon looks like, you probably have more space in your body than you need.
Okay. And what about, and coming back to the idea of resistance, or you don't feel that there's any resistance in training in, saying that you need other things outside of yoga, which is to some people a contentious claim. They don't want to do anything extra other than it's quite a not doing just a yoga practice, right? So you don't find that those certain things in yoga that aren't trained. And what are the...
Use your pull muscles. When do you pull?
Well, I think there are.
No, there isn't. There isn't. Everyone's like, oh, what about the one where you hold the foot and pull it towards your head like a telephone? I can't remember the name of that one. What's that one called, Adam? Help me out.
No, actually, I don't know. It's not in my range of sequence.
Oh, it's not in your sequence. Yeah. Anyway, the one where you hold the foot in.
Yeah.
The archer.
Yeah, I don't know.
That is not, you don't use your pull muscles in yoga. You use your push. That's why so many yogis have dodgy shoulders, because they aren't using the full musculature around their shoulders.
It's not my interview, so I won't kind of go too deep into that. I'm not sure I fully agree. Like things like, just to state, just
go on. I want to hear it. Tell me what you think.
I never usually engage in arguments with my guests. No, I'm just thinking something like that's not the kind of action I would be suggesting as a pull action. More something like a jump through, for example. If you do a jump through in an engaged manner, you'll be pulling your body through. You'll be using that. You'll be using a pull motion. You don't think it's a pull?
It's a push, because you're pushing your body up against gravity.
No.
Although you're thinking of the action of...
You are pulling, because if you weren't pulling, you couldn't get through, for example.
Yes,
And
but
you
it's
should be able to,
momentum.
because you should be able to slow that down in every
It's
point.
still a push. If you're slowing it down, it's a push.
Right.
Because
Anyway,
you're pushing it, because you have to resist gravity to go through. Although you're thinking pull, if you pulled your body through, to go slowly, you have to resist against gravity, which is a push action. If you pulled your body through, you wouldn't go slowly, you'd go quickly.
And so moving upon from that subject,
I have a few others though that I'd like to touch upon.
No, we will. Just in a way, laterally, sideways, slightly. So, what are the pull muscles that we aren't using?
Your lats, and also your biceps. Normally in yoga, we're using a lot of pecs and triceps. That's very basic. Okay, there's a lot more going on. For example, mid to lower traps to get that scapular retraction through load. You don't get that in yoga. Yes, you are doing a bit when you go into a chaturanga, but that's still through push.
So what are the kind of actions that we need to engage outside yoga to get the pull?
For example, rowing.
If we weren't finding that in the yoga practice.
Rowing is a good one, because rowing, you're going to be pulling a mass towards your body. Always when you're resisting your body against gravity, it's a push. But if you're pulling an external force towards you, that would be a pull. And resistance bands around a tree, for example, if you haven't got a rowing machine, or if you take weights and you hold the weight, let's say one hand is on a bench, the other hand is holding the weight, you're parallel to the floor, and you pull that mass towards your body, that would be a pull, because you are pulling in that external force. So you can think of the scapular retraction that would involve those mid to lower traps, the lats, the biceps. They just grossly underused in the yoga community.
I can see that. I'll give you this. I think it's a hard action to get. I would contest that if you're skillful with your body, you will get it. But I don't think it comes naturally. I think generally it would be something like chaturanga. It could be used as a pull, but I don't think it'll be easily taken as a pull.
It's still a push.
Anyway.
Because you're resisting the gravity. Because your body mass is being slowed down against gravity. So yes, you can consciously engage your biceps and engage your lats. Of course you can, but that is not the muscle action of that movement.
And what other actions aren't being used?
One of the big ones that I think is why the yoga butt is such a huge injury in yoga is because your hamstrings, glutes, and back body as a posterior chain have evolved to lift up load against gravity. So if we think about our evolution as humans, and if we had nothing but our bare hands to survive out in nature, we would have a lot of lifting in a day. We would be lifting our children, particularly as women. We'd have them strapped to our bodies as we lifted loads like food into baskets and carried them walking for miles back to the village. Often, I know I'm being very stereotypical, but this is just often how we saw the evolution of man. The males in our tribes would then go out and source animals, and they would carry those carcasses back for long distances. Water, huge loads that would be carried, because the watering hole is a dangerous place. There's lots of animals there, but water would be sourced and then carried back. These are external forces, again, lifting, pulling, something that we don't do in yoga, that we would use to then carry for a long ways through walking and bending forward and then lifting. So hamstrings are long, thin, and underused because they aren't put through load in yoga. We are overstretching our back bodies in an attempt to go deeper and deeper. And we don't have the balance. We're not balancing out these muscles through load by doing things. I know it's very boring to go to the gym and do deadlifts, but we aren't in nature anymore. We live in very sterile environments. We don't lift loads like we used to. And so that is why I know the gym is not the most exciting place, and, getting stretchy bands and adding them into your forward folds seems like a bit of a stupid thing to do. But unfortunately, we You can't get away from our evolution. And the movements in yoga, although they're so varied and, so good for your brain. I'm on a course in neurology and I'm more and more appreciating the complexity of yoga and how important it is for our brains. On our basic day-to-day evolution of our bodies, we aren't getting from yoga what we need.
Mm-hmm. How could you make the yoga practice more suitable? Like something like, I'm thinking like, yes, I don't think I'll give you that one on the hamstrings. I agree. I totally agree. There's just a sedentary lifestyle, an endemic sedentary lifestyle, and an hour yoga practice a day probably doesn't replace the need just to move around a hell of a lot more in the day, right? And I'm including that, and probably you are now, right? You might do a
100%.
practice. Yeah, and then you're just sitting on a computer or something, or I know you do climbing and other stuff, so you're probably a lot better than me. But you're in a forward fold, and the classic thing I see is the person will grab their feet, and if they're especially, obviously stereotyping, if they're, a young, hyper flexible woman, usually they'll pull themselves as far forward as they can, and then come to me a couple of months later, and the hamstring's gone, and they can't even forward fold at all now. So how can you guide someone through not doing such a classic and simply rectifiable injury, right?
Oh, so much. Oh, thank you for asking this question. It's such a good question. So first of all, I just want to clarify that, yes, that stereotype is obvious and it does happen. But also what I found working with so many people during lockdown is that strong, big guys were like, okay, the gym is out of the question now. My running, like, I can't really go out as much as I wanted to, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to take up some Zoom yoga classes. And they were also doing a lot of forward folds, and their incidence of the yoga butt, which, let me just clarify for listeners what that is. That's when the upper attachments of your hamstrings, the tendon attachment, it hurts. It's inflamed. It's not operating as effectively. That was a huge increase in strong males as well getting this yoga butt. And one of the big issues with that is when we are cueing forward folds in yoga, we are cueing people to relax and let go and go to end range. And really, like I explained, if you were out in nature, you would be loading that posterior chain through lifting. You would never go to end range. You would always be adding load into those tendons, which would thicken them, and it would help prevent that inflammation response. So when we're going into forward folds and we're cueing forward folds in yoga, it's actually really important to activate the posterior chain, which is all your muscles in your back body. You can even do it while you're sitting. You can think of squeezing your bum, think of doing a little bit of energy into your hamstrings. But then as you go into that forward fold, to almost imagine someone's pulling your body up, but you're trying to resist that as you're going down into your forward fold, so that there is some activation going through the back body. You don't have to be really specific with it and think, oh, hamstring attachment. That's so specific and kind of.
Yeah, one thing that kind of strikes me as you're speaking about this is that, well, in the kind of original movements, like say natural movements that we may have had in past ages, there was an obvious intent and aim there. Whereas now in yoga, it's like, well, I'm going forward, but there's not a clear aim really sometimes, right? It's like. And it strikes
well,
me,
this is the thing. Our clear aim was to touch our toes.
Yoga's good, so I'm kind of doing yoga, and that the aim is I'm doing something good without kind of clear reason of like why or wherefore of what the reason for. Someone. It's amazing how much a teacher can tell you sometimes, and just think, oh, okay, I'll do that now. Like without explaining, like well, this is the reason why you'd be doing that. So if you're going,
I think. With forward folds, the reason was because we wanted to go deeper. That's one of the things that also I feel the culture in yoga needs to progress away from this. Oh, I went really deep today.
Yeah.
Oh, deeper is better.
Yeah.
The deeper you go, the better a yogi you are. One of my passions is actually to change that culture. That depth doesn't equal better at all. Right. In fact, a lot of people going very deep are suffering the most. Yeah. And so with a forward fold,
what's better then?
Well, with the forward fold, getting that activation through your back body. But guys, it costs nothing to get a couple of stretchy bands that are at a resistance that you feel is suitable for your level. And instead of just always doing forward fold after forward fold, get some stretchy bands and loop them under your feet, hold on to them with your hands, and just do a few simple hip hinges. And when I say hip hinge, just to clarify, the hip is the main moving joint that you're moving through, so that you are getting that full body posterior chain activation, but you're also really loading through these tendons of the hamstrings. You don't have to go to the gym or, stop your yoga, but just at least have a stretchy band and at least do a few of those at the start and end of your practice, or loop them into the middle of your practice, just so that you have a little bit more of a well-rounded resistance. And you can, you can do when you're foot parallel to the floor, you can add in a few pulls as well to get some pull action into your scapula. You and I are not going to see eye to eye on that one, are we, Adam?
But then, you're doing a forward fold. That will be another classic time, padding Gustasana, where you would be pulling back with your arms. Okay, it's not, it's not crazy intense, but you would have a pull
range. It's not full range.
Watch me doing a primary series sometime, and then then you can see some pull action. But I realise that's not an argument because I didn't give you a chance to reply to it. But well, I was going to say, if you were thinking about redefining an aim, then we're talking about the aim like this ambiguous, going deeper into your posture, and then I'd be standing outside so many classes at reputable yoga centers and hearing yoga speak. And I'd be hearing these kind of cues like, now go deep. What the hell is deeper then? What does that mean? Okay, it means like, in a kind of most obvious way that you just kind of pull yourself into a deeper version of the same shape. So if we could and that's a bugbear of mine. If we could redefine what deeper really means, then what might we call that? Do you know what I mean? Like, what would we call progress or advancement? And it's difficult to get into, but how would we define that in a forward? So it doesn't mean the most obvious thing, getting closer to where you're meant to be going.
From my humble opinion, which guys, I'm still learning, hey, but if I had to put a definition on gaining more from your body, it would just be, do I have neurological control of what I'm doing?
Right.
So if I am going to do Pada Gustasana, hand to toe, right? You use that as an example for pull action. Okay. Can I let go of my foot? Can the leg stay where I had it? Can I have full neurological control from where I have my leg all the way down and all the way back up again? Can I do that repeatedly? Can I actually choose a movement that I would normally use an external force to help keep my body in place, let's say a strap or a block or the floor? Can I take away that external force? Can I then use that joint action through full range and control it? And then if I get good at that, can I strap some ankle weights on and can I perform the same movement with ankle weights on? So now I'm actually loading it up, because we have to remember that your body will reach a plateau and then it wants to be challenged further and beyond that. And obviously in nature, that would be varying throughout the seasons. We'd be working super hard during the summer and progressing through the summer, like kind of building up to the climax of winter. We'd rest a lot through winter. We'd probably lose a lot of muscle mass, a lot of strength through winter. But then it would crank up a whole different level again in the summer. And we'd go through these cycles. So as our bodies now in the practice, how can we keep loading our body and continually going through these cycles? Can we sometimes have a break from load? And then can we sometimes load up?
Right. So it is, although you're very into the science of it, it is quite, what you're doing is also something that we have to define within the context of awareness as well. When you're talking about neurological control, you're also really talking about the same, but without wanting to be too kind of like a syllogistic, kind of combining the two things together. You're still talking about yoga, really, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Becoming aware of what you're doing, just in different parlance, really.
Totally, and Adam, one of the things that I've really found so sad is when I'm doing a practice that does on the surface look very physical. I've got my stretchy bands and I've got my spiky balls, and people are like, oh, it's not yoga. It's not yoga what you're doing. And I'm like, the amount of concentration it takes to balance on a moving object like a ball, or the amount of presence needed to lift your 1 rep max, the heaviest load you can do for just 1 repetition. If I can link my breath and my presence into that, it really is a yoga practice. It really is. And I think our definition of yoga maybe needs to expand, that maybe purists need to see that actually, looking at yoga through the lens of just a practice that is only really 100, 150 years old, as how we practice it now, is actually not this ancient thing that had been passed down through generations. And really, where did the inspiration for things like Ashtanga come from? A lot of it came from gymnastics. So maybe we should turn to gymnastics for a few more answers. This is the thing. I think our definition needs to expand. Like I'm on this neuroscience course, and oh my gosh, it is so amazing that maybe keeping your head still on your shoulders is actually too easy for us yogis. Maybe we should be moving our head side to side while we're in a difficult balance. Now you're talking huge levels of presence and working your vestibular system and getting your visual system to be challenged. I feel like there's so much more out there, and we've kind of put ourselves in a little box, and it's so important to get out of that box.
So there's another question I've got there, but before we get to that, the obvious question that comes is what does your day of training look like? What does your practice look like inside and outside of yoga?
Okay, so I consider all of my movement practice, even when I'm in nature, as my yoga practice. So I meditate every day. I feel like that is the sacred part of my. I meditate twice a day, most days, and outside of that, movement, I try and get off of my mat. I try and walk barefoot on grass and rocks and roots and sand and pebbles, to try and get that neural stimulation through your feet, which are just on bland, flat surfaces all the time, which is, again, so unnatural. I try and, climb as opposed to just always being on a square piece of rubber doing the same movements. Climbing is one of the most incredible forms of yoga practice you can get out there, because you have to put your body in some very funny positions. You have to overcome your fear brain for reaching for something that is just out of reach, that if you don't get it, you're going to fall. You have to be brave enough to fall, which of course is a huge part of your yoga practice. You have to be brave in your balancing. So I take my yoga practice off of the mat. I do heavy lifts and resistance training, which has been a real game changer in terms of pain levels in a hypermobile body that I've had since lots of pain since childhood. Right. And I do a lot of cardio, which is another thing I feel my body was lacking in on the mat. I couldn't even run around the block without half dying. And so now I take my yoga mat and I'll do almost a yoga practice, but I'll almost add in cardio to it, like mountain runners in a plank pose.
You get up halfway and start sprinting on the spot. No, I'll give you.
I do. I'm not even exaggerating. I do. I actually run on the mat and I do high jumps, and then I do a yoga practice on my mat, but I do all cardio. It's so much more intense than just holding a pose still for 5 breaths, but so good. Just that all-rounded thing of, am I using all the aspects of my body?
But it sounds very balanced. I mean, some people are still going to say, well, that's not yoga, it's not spiritual. What are you interested in, the yoga philosophy? I mean, is that your thing as well? Or, I mean, do you combine that in your practice or your day or your teaching? And how does that relate to the more, say, current take that you've got on yoga?
So I would say that my deepest philosophy is expressed through my meditation practice.
Right.
I come from a very religious childhood. And so I think a part of my rebellion against being too dogmatic in my yoga practice comes from almost resisting religion. And a part of me maybe felt, and this is not right of me, I realize I have a lot of growth in this area. And I actually respect the skeptics' point of view on this. I understand where they're coming from when they say it's not really yoga, Cel. I understand where they're coming from. But as someone who's grown up in this sort of religious, this is the right thing and this is the wrong thing kind of childhood, I'm deeply against that. So for me, one of the things that has really struck a chord in my spiritual journey has been learning about Buddhism, and how when you read Buddhist texts, it's really not about this external thing like a god, or you've got to do the right thing for XYZ reason. It's more just your own little journey. Like you yourself, are you every day doing the best you can to be a good person? And I know in my heart that I'm doing that. I know I've gone through so many different experiences, and I've met so many really, really overt yoga people that were not very nice people, and I'm like, well, what is that all about? So I think it's a personal thing. I think that we can't put labels on it, because when I remember doing Vipassana, one of the things that I didn't like about Vipassana was they said that this is the only way. And I was like, no, there is not just one way. There has to be many ways. And one of the things that one of the ways I've always defined yoga is that it's a living art. And because it's living, it's always changing. And if someone is coming into this world and seeing a way for them to use their body to live out of pain and to be a good person, for me, that's the definition of yoga, far beyond.
And what's the aim? The aim is for you. Just to clarify, the aim for you is very very imminent, is very of the world, right? I mean, let's say the conceived aim of yoga was quite transcendental, right? It was to realize some kind of higher, let's say, knowledge of self. But you're positioning your take on yoga very much, of an use of this world, use of yourself in this world for
a use of this world, but also if we think of all the different spectrums of your state, your being, right? Let's put at the bottom of the spectrum something like shame, and let's slowly start climbing the spectrum into maybe anger, and then a little higher than that we've got joy, and then beyond that we have bliss. Everyone is on that spectrum at a different place, and everyone will have a different place of transcending into that place. Now, for me to step on the mat and go, I want to achieve bliss, like it's not where I'm at. It's just not where I'm at. For me, every day it's probably just achieving joy and presence. And if I'm achieving that, and then when you achieve that, you're like, okay, but what's the next level on the spectrum? Like if we think about it in terms of manageable baby steps, it's almost like you're actually going to get there. But I've met honestly, Adam, it hurts my heart to even say this, but I've met people that are so like, they're on the yoga path and they so like, this is the only way, blah, blah, blah. And then they treat the lady at the coffee shop terribly. I'm like, you should not be achieving bliss right now. That is not where you're at. You should be more of this world and treating your fellow human being with a bit more kindness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I suppose just to tune it down a notch slightly for a second, well, if you've got any key suggestions for people, I mean, your specialism and my particular interest with your teaching is the hypermobility stuff, because I see it as so endemic in the yoga world, and I want to particularly focus on this for you in this interview. Well, what are your take-home points that you could say, 3 things that you ought not to be doing, perhaps, just to kind of ram that point home again?
Yeah, it's going to be the same things I've said. It's really simple. I think hypermobile people, we have to remember, I just want to define hypermobility just in case anybody doesn't understand. Yeah. So when you hear someone talking about being double jointed, they've got that natural flexibility in their body. They can almost waltz into their first ever yoga class and the teacher runs up to them and goes, oh, you have a beautiful practice. And really, it's just that this person has actually got something inside their collagen formation, which is in all of their body, that's a little bit disrupted. So it doesn't have that nice taut, which is actually healthier, guys. You want that nice taut stop to your tissues, so that you get to the end of a movement and you go, oh, that's the end of where I can go. Oh, maybe I can go a little bit further, but I feel my muscle stretching. For hypermobile people, we don't feel the muscle stretching necessarily. We'll go to the end of our range. And then it will feel like nothing. And then we'll continue beyond that until we think we can feel something. But really what we've done is we've gone into our ligaments. And this is dangerous for us because one of the things we don't have is the signals back to the brain. It's called proprioceptive signals, telling us where we are in space. So we can feel something, but the little bit of protection that our joint has of the ligaments and the capsules that wrap around the joints, those ligaments once they overstretch, the joint then sits in a very soggy, formation. And it doesn't then follow a natural congruence with movement. Like, let's think of a knee walking down the street. It just sort of swings forward and back as you're walking. If you have hypermobility, the knee will then almost go into what we call a valgus knee line. It'll collapse inwards. And over time, that joint will experience wear and tear. So this is really common for yoga people. So I would say we have to understand that basic science of hypermobility when we're working with hypermobile people. They can't feel what you feel. So when we're asking questions like, how does that feel? That's the wrong question to be asking people with hypermobility. Or can you feel that? You know, that's something so many people in yoga use as teaching cues.
Mm-mm.
You know, go to where you really feel something. No, for hypermobile people, it's the wrong focus entirely. We need to be putting our focus on almost going out of end range into a focus of resistance. Now, I used the example of a forward fold at the start of the podcast. Yeah. When moving into forward fold, can you imagine someone's holding you and pulling you up while you're trying to go down into the forward fold?
I suppose
this is a great tip for hypermobile people.
It is difficult. And another thing that we're facing, I suppose, is we've got the format of a yoga class now is so limited in terms of time, in terms of generalized focus amongst the many, many people of many different abilities and ranges. And that kind of instruction, although probably I'm rather wordy and I would probably say something like that. How would you, you're a lot smoother than me, cue it in a fewer words? So what are your kind of cues rather than saying, well, you know, kind of deepen your whatever, or, you know, like, you know, go to the end off, really feel that, or, you know, how would you cue something alternatively for a better effect?
That's a good question. I think we teach quite differently because for me, I don't even go there anymore. I'm like always full control of your body. Are you active? Because I find with a lot of very stiff people, they're weak.
Yeah. So can you give an example?
Let's use, I don't know, let's use Paschimottanasana as an example, seated forward fold. Instead of getting people to grab hold of their feet and pull their chest towards their thighs, I would get them to actually get their arms out of the equation. Imagine someone sitting on them and they're trying to push that person up. And then maintain that as you go a little bit further. Can you, at that new deeper range, create the same resistance? Now, if you're really good, why don't you whack some weights into that? Stick maybe an ankle weight on your back, because they roll out, don't they? They turn into like a little mat. Right. Stick that on your back, or maybe take some stretchy bands and, you know, tie that to a tree branch if you're sitting on the floor under a tree, and you can almost try and pull your body into a forward fold, but you've got the resistance of the stretchy band pulling you up. You know, I'm giving really random examples that aren't going to help you with your teaching. I'm thinking more self-practice. Yeah, but I guess where I'm going is just changing it up.
Yeah, I see the ideas. Yeah. And where are you going with your practice?
On my neuroscience course, which is related to biomechanics and movement. And so the three systems that send information from the body back up to the brain are your proprioceptive system, which we've spoken about in regards to hypermobility. But we also have our inner ear canal, which is our vestibular system, and we have our visual system as well. Those systems are producing input to the brain, and how your brain interprets that will then result in the output. And so I'm learning all about how we can heighten our brain's ability to get that information, to interpret it better, so the output is at a much higher degree. So, for example, a class that I'm going to be doing through the month of January will be about the cerebellum, how the cerebellum deals with accuracy, balance, and coordination. And so in the practice, we're actually going to be challenging your cerebellum and doing lots of unusual things. So my practice, I know, guys, I get a lot of stick for it. It doesn't look like yoga, but I know so many people have written to me going, thank you, this class, oh my gosh, I've left feeling better than ever. Finally, that pain in my knee is gone, or XYZ has changed. So yeah, my practice does look really wacky, but yeah, I know people are getting a lot of value from it. And it's just exciting learning about the complexities of the body and the brain.
So there are still very specific things you're doing to cue certain kind of psychological reflexes, it sounds like. So it's
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like small movements. Have you got any examples you can give of those?
So, for example, let's think vestibular system is your inner ear. And I used this example before, but I think it's worth it for you guys that are practicing Ashtanga. Why don't you, next time you're in Paragustasana, you're doing hand to foot pose, instead of just keeping your eyes fixed at a certain gaze and your head still, try two different things. One, move your head, but keep your eyes on a fixed point, or keep your head still and move your eyes. So you're actually challenging the visual and vestibular systems while you're in your practice, because if you don't use it, you lose it, and these are input systems to the brain. And what's so fascinating about the brain is that if it isn't getting challenged through these different inputs, the brain goes, oh, we don't need this anymore. So let's re-recruit the neural tissue to a different zone. And if you don't use it, you lose it. So now you aren't getting accurate information through the eyes and the ears anymore. And the brain operates like this. If it senses a threat, it'll produce a response to help you change your behavior. So, for example, if people suffer from fatigue, pain, nausea, dizziness, it's not necessarily that there's anything related to those symptoms. It could just be the brain not getting accurate information and the brain going, oh, it's a bit scary for me. I sense a threat. I'm going to make the person feel super tired so they lie down in bed.
Right.
It's not actually because you've done anything to feel tired.
Yeah.
Or you know what? I'm going to give you knee pain. I know I'm going to change your behavior. I'm going to give you knee pain. So it's fascinating. A lot of times we just change a couple of things in terms of the input, and people's long-standing pain issues they've had for years disappears instantly. It's really amazing.
And kind of nicely segueing in to my next question, you can reach a lot of people now through, modern mediums. I mean, yoga, since I started, has come online, not, since very recent times, but, since, I started when it was hardly even internet, right? So, things have changed in terms of the spread of information. And you use the platform fantastically, and you really spread a lot of useful information around. How do you feel about, that, the kind of the way that the modern, let's say, current yoga is being approached, pluses and minuses, maybe just.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is there's a lot of good stuff happening out there. Like any industry, there's always going to be good and bad, and even the bad kind of needs to be there, because it's like, it's like me starting out and being very bendy and really wanting to earn a living. And so I did bendy things on Instagram. Like, I had to go through that, and I know I did the wrong thing, but I didn't know at the time. So, who am I to judge someone doing that now? But still, it's my responsibility with the current knowledge I have to share that I don't think that that's the way that we should keep going. And so that is obviously my message. But I'm so happy that people are out there moving, to be honest with you. So whatever they're doing, whatever inspires someone to move is fantastic. Because when I train people in anatomy, I start the anatomy training with this statement. There is really no good or bad movement. The only bad movement is the one that you're not doing. The one that when you're always static, the one that you're always still, when you're on the chair, go out and move, because it's okay. If you're going to do something wrong, it's okay. As long as you're moving, you're going to learn from that movement, and you're going to progress, and you're going to develop as a mover. And movement is so, so important. Although I sit still for my meditation, I realized after Vipassana just how important movement was for my sanity and my body and my health. Because obviously sitting still in Vipassana is so hard, and huge gains in terms of my mind and my progress as a meditator, but actually the physical price that I paid afterwards, I realized for me wasn't a price worth paying. And so now when I see someone moving, even if it's not perfect, I'm like, well done, you are moving your body. So yeah, on Instagram, if someone is doing bendy things, and someone looks at that and goes, oh, I want to learn how to do that, go ahead. You move, guys. Just keep moving.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think it's a cliche, but you're going to get your teacher, right? And I taught, first of all, I was doing everything in the kind of opposite way that I would cue it or revise it now, and I think as you, I got very popular in the classes because I think both of us were probably really enthusiastic about our subject, and then, you get the students that resonate with you, right? And you hope that maybe you all move together, or you also hope you don't do too much harm to those enthusiastic students like you that join your classes originally, right? And we're encouraged, well, at least I encourage people to do all kinds of very overly bendy and crazy stuff. So, and that's fantastic. What do you think about diet? Do you have any recommendations on diet along with this?
It's such a deep question, and all I'm going to say, it's so individual. Hey, as a yogi at heart and someone who deeply cares about the planet, animals, I went vegan for almost 10 years, but I'd absolutely destroyed my body, guys. My hair almost all fell out. Sorry to get really graphic now, block your ears if you don't like graphic information, but I didn't do a solid poo for about 5 years. It's terrible. And so I thought, okay, obviously something has to change, started eating fish first. It wasn't enough for me. So I know it's not the best, but I had to switch over back into eating higher levels of protein, and I do my best to source it from the, best places I possibly can. So I know it's organic and the animals have been free, but my heart hurts, because I know that ethically there is no better thing than going vegetarian, but my body physically couldn't handle it. But it's so interesting how different we all are, because I have a friend who she thrives on a vegetarian diet. For her, it was the absolute best thing. And, I'm someone who read all the China study, and I watched Forks Over Knives, and I was like, vegetarianism/veganism is the way forward. And man, I went in, but I just couldn't get away from the symptoms. It was, yeah. And so now I call myself a flexitarian. Yeah.
Right. And even,
but it's a deep, deep subject, very deep subject.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're not on your own there. A lot of people have gone through that, and even when you were vegetarian, you were still trying to eat kind of the kind of beans and the tofus and that kind of
I went in on the beans, in on the tofus, and that's all I lived on.
Yeah.
No, I did my best, and I tried to be intelligent about it. I read so many books, but in the end, it just didn't work. It's so sad, because I know in my heart that is the way forward. But yeah, it was that or losing all my hair and not doing no solid poos.
Yeah, I wouldn't want you to lose your hair.
What's your opinion, Adam?
Oh, yeah, this is not my platform.
Please tell us.
Well, I'm pretty much a vegetarian. But the thing is, there is a complicated question. I'm going to do an interesting episode soon with Mary Taylor Freeman, who is Richard Freeman's wife, and she is really into food and and yoga, and she's and she knows a lot about this subject. So we're going to discuss it more there. But I think it is a complicated opinion, because also the times of your life change as well. Right, so I'm 42 now, right? So I don't need to eat that I think I could have done probably with maybe a non-vegetarian diet, maybe, but for the high levels of movement I was doing when in my 20s and 30s, when I look back and see pictures of myself. But now, no, I do eat eggs, I have to say, which I didn't before. But I mean, you look at me and I'm pretty solid now, and I'm a vegetarian, yeah. But so awesome. It's a strange thing, and it's
so strange.
And because the other thing is, I don't want to go on about this too much, but I don't eat that much to be honest. I think but it's different metabolisms and different times of life, because there was a time I think when I couldn't have eaten enough, whereas now when you get older, I don't have that feeling. I mean, I eat one main meal a day, to be honest. I don't eat so much, and I don't seem to lose weight or put it on. So yeah, I mean, but it's trimming the sails, because you can strike a point and that works, and then you can get caught up in that point and it's no longer working, but you don't any longer realize that. And that's.
I think that's really wise advice, because not only is it a very individual thing that each person needs to look out for themselves and figure out what works for them, but also it should change. Absolutely. I think especially, I also don't want to go on about this too much. And guys, I have no knowledge in this. I've read a few books that's as extensive as my knowledge is. But I also just want to mention that for females, especially with our hormones, and I know guys also have a lot of hormone stuff that they need to look after. But I think especially in my little journey, when I look back on my cycle, my sleep, all the different things my body was going through, I think hormonally, I just wasn't getting what I needed to actually function well. And again, I think it's my own body, especially as a hypermobile person, I think I needed high levels of protein to kind of knit everything together, because everything's just so sloppy all the time. Especially I think that's why my gut suffered so much. I don't have that collagen even in my gut, keeping the formation of my gut. I know it sounds so wild to even think about that, but since I'm eating more solidy kind of hardcore food, my guts have improved dramatically. And as a result, my immune system and my hormones, oh man, I can't tell you the difference, but it's such an individual process.
Well, I think it's related to emotional and kind of personality types as well. You strike me as, using the kind of Ayurvedic ideas as quite a kind of vata and energetic person, and that would have implications on the kind of energy that your body needed and the amount of energy that you went through as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm hyper mode. I can't drink coffee, guys. Otherwise, you think I'm being hyper now. Whoa.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I was going to ask you, and this is my last question, and I thought it's a neat little foray into it as well. How do you cope with the stress of your workload and the demands of the pressure that you have? Because you're very successful now, you're very popular. I'm sure a lot of people are asking for you and asking for your attention, and you've only got so much time in the day, and I know you're doing so much with it. How do you structure your day to be efficient and not be over? I can see you could be completely overwhelmed or very stressed with all these different things you want to do, right? So,
well, do you know what? One good thing about my personality is I don't put pressure on myself to do everything. So, for example, I was telling you before we started recording that when I'm preparing for my workshops, I put so much time into them. And I don't even leave my room, my desk for like 2 weeks. I call it the hole. I go into the hole and I don't leave the hole until the work is done. But, in that time, I won't put pressure on myself to do a daily practice or to cook every meal. I'll sometimes order in a meal, or if I'm like, I can only meditate once today, that's fine. Oh, I didn't do breathing, no problem. I tend to try and do a few cold showers every week. No cold showers. Like, I let things go to make space. And I feel like that's a really important message that maybe I'm glad we're talking about this actually, because I feel like you look on the outside and someone's like, this is my daily routine, and they're like, wow, how do they do everything? And the truth is, it's just not possible. So what I call zig and zag. Now is a time in my life where I don't need to set my alarm very early. I let myself wake up naturally. I do my full morning routine. And then I dedicate 3 or 4 hours a day to work. But when it's time to put pedal to the metal, I can do it. I can go. It's another good thing in my personality. I can graft when I need to graft, but I don't put pressure on myself to keep up the morning routine and, to like do it's just not possible. You've got to cut yourself some slack. So that's my strategy. I don't know if that helps anybody out there, but I think a lot of people put too much pressure on themselves to do everything. And maybe me sharing this, maybe that will give you guys some permission also to just, don't worry. It's all good.
But maybe focus on one thing at a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like you've got a good focus going on, which is important, to be able to train the mind and focus it on one thing. Well, that's yoga, isn't it? What do you have to do outside yoga? What do you, let's rephrase that again. What do you do other just to relax and unwind outside hobbies?
So I just picked up my guitar this last month.
Right.
And I mean, it's a massive car crash, but it brings me so much joy. And on my neuroscience course, we're learning about how, it's going to sound wacky, guys, brace yourself, but actually how good juggling is for hypermobility because it stimulates the visual and vestibular systems. And so I've taken up juggling as well. And again, oh my gosh, it's so bad, but I absolutely love it. I'm just dropping balls basically, but I'm just enjoying myself.
How many can you do?
I'm only on 2 at the moment.
2?
I've only just started. I know. I'm really struggling.
That's not even.
That's how bad I am.
I can do 3. The actions change very much.
The secret to go from 2 to 3. That's where I'm at.
The opposite, because 3 you throw the one in the air and you move. But 4 you do a different movement. You can't see on the.
Can you do 4?
I could do 4, but you have to practice a little bit. I can do 3 now, but I'd have to practice before. And
I'm so jealous.
That's about the limit, really, of my abilities. So just as a final thing, I always ask this question. It's a silly question, but but some people provide funny answers, so I keep it on. What are your do you have any guilty pleasures? What would you say?
Well, right now I'm really into this program on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, which isn't like me because I don't normally like blood and guts and violence, but it's literally how England was formed. Well, I mean, it's not based perfectly historically; it's also embellished truth. But
it's Netflix.
I'm just really enjoying it. I'm getting a bit lost in the story of it, which is not like me. I hate starting series because it takes up so much time. But I started this one, and it's my little guilty pleasure. I like to snuggle up under the duvet on the sofa and watch a Last Kingdom episode.
You're not on your Netflix has definitely been a guilty pleasure of choice by many people. Maybe, yeah. Netflix, it's chocolate and Netflix or chocolate and Netflix at the same time, even.
I mean, that sounds like a really good night to me.
A guilty pleasure combination. Cynical. Celeste for coming on the podcast.
Adam, thanks, man.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful discussion. And thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say a really sincere thank you to your listeners. I know I talk super fast and I can go to town a bit on stuff. I get super passionate, but guys, thank you for listening. Thank you so much for your energy. It's just, it means so much.
Thank you. I won't say, you can find Celeste on Instagram, Celeste. Say your surname for us, Celeste.
Pereira,
that's what I thought. And you can find it everywhere, so I won't link. I'll link it to you in the podcast. Okay.
Thank you so much, Adam. Cheers, mate.